So for chapter 25, we are looking at World War I and its aftermath. Keep in mind, we are not looking at it necessarily from an American perspective, but from a European perspective. So we will mention US involvement in this chapter, but really it's looking at what was happening in Europe. So your first learning objective for this chapter is to describe the course of World War I and explain the factors that contributed to an Allied victory. So World War I, as you read in chapter 24, really there's a long tension, a long buildup, but it starts with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and World War I goes from 1914 to 1918. And you've got outbreak and early movements that you're going to look at. You're going to also look at, the war in the sky, and some really cool things that happen. This term of dogfighting in the sky. Also, you're going to read about stalemate and trench warfare during World War I. Some turning points come, of course, towards the end of the war, right? You've got the U.S. that enters the war in April of 1917. Remember, this war ends in 1918. And just like true American fashion, we kind of come in towards the end of the war and then we help with the victory. Of course we do. We've got fresh troops. We haven't been involved in this conflict for years on end at this point. And we enter in response to Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. Russia is going to leave the exit following the Bolshevik Revolution, and I have a whole video included for you about the Bolshevik Revolution. And they signed their own treaty with Germany, allowing them to leave the war to worry about the civil war that's happening in Russia. And then you've got armistice that's going to happen on November 11th of 1918, and that's kind of the ending of the war. But there is a whole lot that happens between the beginning and the end that you're going to read about in chapter 25. Your second learning objective for this chapter is to analyze the causes and consequences of the Russian Revolution. And the Bolshevik Revolution, it's really interesting when you get into it. This is one of those full revolutions that replaces the monarchy. And you have it in reaction to Tsar Nicholas II, his regime, and just how he was resisting to democratic reforms. He suppressed dissent through censorship. There's the secret police that was used, and just outright oppression, really driving political radicals underground and fueling this revolutionary sentiment. Late industrialization came to Russia. It led to overcrowded cities, poor working conditions, significant economic disparity. And peasants, though theoretically free since 1861, really endured a lot of land shortages, heavy taxes, and stagnant rural poverty during this time. And so Russia's entry into the war brought devastating losses. Over 1.5 million dead, 5 million are wounded. It really crippled the economy, disrupted food production, and also it just caused a lot of widespread unrest. And so you see these political leaders emerge during this time, and socialist ideas growing very rapidly among workers, soldiers, and peasants. And the Bolsheviks are led by this guy, Lenin. And Bolsheviks is just another political party. Like how in the United States we have our two major parties are the Democrats and the Republicans. Bolshevik is just another political party in Russia. That's all that means. And this guy, Lenin, he offered solutions like land redistribution, peace, and worker control. And it appealed to a lot of people because they were in the midst of this chaos of war and economic collapse. And so this immediate trigger came in the February Revolution, and that's when these mass protests erupted over bread shortages and just these horrific living conditions. And that's where you're going to see the revolution really taking off. And then your book goes back to really World War I, right? So your third learning objective is to describe the major features of the peace settlement at the end of the war and evaluate their successes or failures. So the major features of the Treaty of Versailles, this is in June of 1919. We have the war guilt clause and reparations. And of course, Germany is blamed for that. hold on to that little nugget because Germany's going to come back in World War II, and kind of in reaction to them being blamed. Territorial adjustments, and I have this map up because I wanted you to kind of see Europe and the Middle East after the peace settlements and territories, how they're shifted and they change. You've got military restrictions placed on Germany. You have the League of Nations, which is so interesting because United States President at the time, Woodrow Wilson, came up with this idea of the League of Nations and his 14 points. But we don't join the League of Nations because our Senate didn't want to. So here we are, the US proposes it, we throw it out there, and then we don't even join it. And I'm sure, as you can kind of tell, the League of Nations will eventually morph over time into the United Nations. So yeah, it is a success, definitely. It's just funny that the US doesn't join their own nation league that they create. So look for those successes and look for those failures as you're reading through this chapter. Your next learning objective for this chapter is to analyze the impact of war and revolution on the culture of the 1920s. And we definitely see profoundly reshaping of the 1920s. We see a lot of artistic innovation, social transformation, and a modern worldview. So think about what's going on in the 1920s in the US. You've got the Harlem Renaissance, you've got flapper culture, you've got all these really cool things. It's known as the Roaring Twenties here in the United States. In art, we go from disillusionment to the avant-garde, and we have expressionism, surrealism. We also have literary modernism. You've got like T.S. Eliot. So a lot of cool things are happening. You've got the Jazz Age, and it also takes root in European cities. And vibrant cabarets and nightlife in Berlin and Paris celebrate this liberation while also channeling, societal fears into performance art. Again, you've got flappers, right? We know that they're very prominent in the US, but they're also in Europe and around the world too. So this modern girl, also known as the flapper. Women empowerment during the war, passed on with suffrage and workplace gains. Then we also have mass media happening. So there's a lot that's going on that really reflects this modern view after World War I. And finally, you should be able to discuss the development of mass culture and the rise of modern dictators. So, and this is Mussolini, right? And the black shirts. So Mussolini comes, there's this void in power in Italy. He's going to use that to make his rise. Mussolini will take Italy into World War II, but you also have, this economic upswing fueling mass cultural growth. You've got radios and advertising reach across class lines, and what we start to see is this unifying of large populations around shared experiences. And one of those big experiences, of course, is World War I, right? So, you've got also just this propaganda and media control that's coming out. So you've got dictators like this guy, Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler, who understood and knew how to use the media's power. They regulated press, they regulated the educational content, they regulated schools and film and radio to spread their ideologies, even as democratic societies use the same platforms to spread their ideologies, and also for popular culture. You're also going to see that a lot of this propaganda is paired with terror, especially when we're talking about like state terror. You've got secret police, censorship, indoctrination in schools and youth groups, and really is to eliminate dissent and to maintain control. So just as you go through, keep in mind those 5 learning objectives as you're reading through chapter 25 and really explaining kind of also towards the end, the lead up to World War II as we move closer to it in history.